Hello, this is Julie Lerman.
And this is Steve Smith. In this module, we're going to focus on the elements of a domain model which are in our bounded context.
You've seen these in the mind map. It's patterns like entities and aggregates and more.
You can find me online at ardallas.com or on Twitter as @ardallas.
And you can find me online at thedatafarm.com or on Twitter at Julie Lerman.
In this module, we'll focus on the technical aspects involved when modeling a bounded context. We use these terms while modeling, and these same terms refer to patterns we'll use when we code. The concepts flow through the entire process, which is great. You don't have to keep switching hats or mindsets.
We'll start by grounding ourselves in the domain and understand why it's important to stay focused there. DDD models are driven by behaviors, not classes and properties. This is another very cool shift in thinking for those of us who have always focused on objects. Then you'll learn about some terms used to describe domain models, rich and anemic. You'll learn what the terms mean at a conceptual level and what the code that they're describing looks like.
Entities are the key types in your system, but not every type in your system is an entity.
You'll learn how entities fit into DDD, how to differentiate entities that have complex needs from simpler entities that might only need some basic CRUD logic. And you'll be able to see how we're implementing all of these concepts in our code.
Domain-driven design is filled with lots of specific terms. Much like the ubiquitous language that we use to make it easier to communicate while working within a bounded context, understanding and using the terms of DDD makes it easier to talk about the process. We'll spend the bulk of this module focusing on some of the concepts behind modeling bounded contexts. Concepts that are critical to this process, but unfortunately, often misunderstood.
I've definitely had my challenges with some of the DDD concepts. Some of my issues were because the terms overlapped with other technologies I use. For example, I do a lot of work with Microsoft's ORM called Entity Framework. Entities are a key element in Entity Framework, and they're also a key element in DDD. So I thought my understanding of entities from Entity Framework was enough to translate to DDD entities, but it really wasn't. And my less than solid grasp on DDD entities caused problems when I was trying to model domains and implement the model in code. We also have the concept of a context in Entity Framework. While the real goal of that context is to provide interaction with the database, it also does provide a boundary around a model. But it's very different than the concept of a bounded context. And that definitely confused me for a while. Another important element in a DDD model is value objects. These got me pretty confused at first, and my ego was saved by discovering that others have also been confused by value objects. But I've worked on my DDD education and sorted these problems out. So in this module, it's really important to both Steve and I that you start off on the right foot with a proper understanding of entities, value objects, and some of the other DDD puzzle pieces, so that domain-driven design can help you with your complex problems, not complicate them even more. It's important to remember that first D in DDD stands for domain. And yeah, the other two Ds, driven and design, but we really want to focus on domain here.
By now, you've probably heard us talk about this plenty, but both Julie and I find that we constantly have to remind ourselves to focus on the domain. We hear ourselves begin to talk about the user interaction with the app and have to ask, well, what part of the vet clinic domain is this user? Yeah, obviously we care about the user and how the actual application will work from their perspective, but that's for another conversation. And we have to draw ourselves back to focusing on modeling the domain.
I have quite a long history with data access, and I catch myself worrying about how our domain model will translate to the database so that things definitely get persisted correctly. That's when Steve needs to give me that look, "You're doing it again, Julie," and I have to bring my focus back to the domain of the vet clinic again. So while it may seem redundant to harp on domain, this diligent focus will help you avoid the complications and distractions that come from thinking outside of the domain or the subdomain that you're focused on.
Here's an important quote from Eric Evans' book about this focus on the domain. The domain layer is responsible for representing concepts of the business, information about the business situation, and business rules. State that reflects the business situation is controlled and used here, even though the technical details of storing it are delegated to the infrastructure. This layer of the domain is the heart of business software.
Just to reiterate, the domain model is the heart of the business software. This is the whole point behind domain-driven design. Focus on the domain, not the technical details of how the software will work.
In a typical database-driven app, we're used to focusing on properties or attributes of classes. Our apps sometimes become all about editing property values and the state of our objects. However, when we are modeling a domain, we need to focus on the behaviors of that domain, not simply about changing the state of objects.
Michelle didn't talk to us about setting the name of a dog or editing the time of an appointment. She told us that she needs to schedule an appointment, and when she does that, she needs to book a room and create a schedule item on a doctor's calendar as well. So scheduling an appointment is a lot more than setting the attributes of the objects involved, the appointment time and identity of the pet we're making the appointment for. We're talking instead about how the system behaves. In response to scheduling an appointment, the system should also book a room and do something to the calendars of the doctor and any vet techs that might be involved. An important way to identify behaviors in your system is by focusing on events. Doing so gives you a great path to understanding the behaviors of your domain. Alberto Brandolini devised a great way to brainstorm with clients, which is referred to as event storming. It begins by having a somewhat chaotic brainstorming session with a good number of domain experts writing events on Post-its and sticking them on a wall. The format of what they write is in the past tense. For example, an appointment was booked, a client contacted the office, or a dog was weighed in. I've facilitated quite a few event storming workshops with clients, and I'm a big fan of using this process to help get a picture of the domain, discover bounded contexts, and even discover key problems that should be addressed. Another interesting methodology for modeling a system based on events is called event modeling. Adam Dimitruk came up with this workflow and has had great success using it to help teams collaborate on learning about the domain and designing the flow of software. I was fortunate to participate in a 3-day workshop with Adam to learn about event modeling. We won't be teaching you about event storming or event modeling in this course. Those are beyond the scope of our goals here, but we did want to be sure you were aware of them. You'll find links for more information about event storming and event modeling at the end of this module.
In order to understand the difference between design that's focused on attributes versus design focused on behaviors, it will help to understand two commonly used terms in domain-driven design: anemic domain models and rich domain models. An anemic domain model is a domain model that is focused on the state of its objects, which is the antithesis of DDD. While the term is somewhat negative, indicating a deficiency, you don't need to perceive it that way. There's nothing wrong with anemic classes when all you need to do is some CRUD logic. But if you are creating a domain model, you've already made the decision that your domain is too complex for simple CRUD. So anemia in a domain model is considered an anti-pattern.
Martin Fowler writes about anemic domain models with such drama that you may never mistakenly use them in your domain model. He says the basic symptom of an anemic domain model is that at first blush it looks like the real thing. There are objects, many named after the nouns in the domain space, and these objects are connected with the rich relationships and structure that true domain models have. The catch comes when you look at the behavior and you realize that there's hardly any behavior on these objects, making them little more than bags of getters and setters. Indeed, often these models come with design rules that say you're not to put any domain logic in the domain objects. Instead, there are a set of service objects which capture all the domain logic. These services live on top of the domain model and use the domain model for data.
What we aim for then is rich domain models, not anemic domain models, when we are modeling our domain. Rich domain models will represent the behaviors and business logic of your domain. Classes that simply affect state are considered an anti-pattern in a domain model and therefore get the nasty label of anemic, even though they are perfectly fine in a CRUD model.
Martin Fowler doesn't mince words when it comes to anemic domain models, saying the fundamental horror of this anti-pattern is that it's so contrary to the basic idea of object-oriented design, which is to combine data and process together. I have to say I agree, and I've worked with many teams who have had to deal with the self-inflicted pain of treating their domain entities like DTOs, lacking any encapsulation or behavior. That can work for simple CRUD apps, but is often a disaster in a DDD model.
While Martin Fowler and other DDDers have strong words to say about anemic domain models, we'd like to share a gentler message, which is to strive for rich domain models and have an awareness of the strengths and weaknesses of those that are not so rich.